So when you're looking at Plaid over the last few years, what would you say are some of the distinct phases or evolutions over the time that have stood out to you? And I was wondering maybe if we could distill a couple of those distinct phases and any insights that stood out to you over that evolution.
Yeah, I think about Plaid really in three phases. So phase one, and I'll go through the phases kind of quickly, but phase one, just getting to product market fit. So that was sort of the 2013 to 2017 phase. Phase two is after having achieved product market fit, starting to scale and starting to hit some of these scaling challenges where you're getting more pull from customers than the team can really keep up with. And then phase three is that the company really is scaled pretty significantly, multiple independent business lines that are each growing quickly. And you really need to start figuring out how you scale velocity when there's so many things going on. And you're also at the point where you haven't yet made a ton of investments in platforms, and you really need to start doing that in order to gain that velocity. So across those three phases, I think there's some interesting sort of ins and outs of how you think about operational maturity, technical maturity, and culture. So, in phase one, when you're just in that like product market fit phase, I think Plaid in particular was a lot about just like what is the next problem in front of us, and how do we get to product market fit very, very quickly. So the stage was that the founders were engineers, the product was for engineers, so it really meant that like the early team was very engineering first, and because the product was really for people like themselves, like I think there was just a lot of inherent empathy for customers, and so what that enabled us to do at that stage, and this is before I joined, but it was really that you could have a small team that was not very functionally driven. It was really sort of everybody focused on everything, right? So everybody was fixing bugs, everybody was shipping features, everybody was handling support. So you didn't need a ton of operational maturity. There was not a lot of formal structure to the teams. As an example, we didn't really even have teams until there was 40 engineers. Everything was just organized around projects, right? And so what that looked like was you would basically have a global stack rank of projects every quarter and say like, these are the highest ROI projects, and move down the list and draw a cut line. And then once you were done shipping a project, engineers would go their separate ways and move on to the next most impactful projects. So you were always sure you were working on the most important thing at any one time. And then you put in some really lightweight structures on top of that to make sure that the people management side works. So we had a very light matrix structure where every IC would be working with a manager on the project, but also a stable people manager. But the team size is small enough that everybody has context on what's going on, and it keeps communication and organizational overhead really low. Technical maturity at that stage is also sort of a side effect. I think you're really just trying to solve problems, and you may end up solving a very hard technical problem and thinking about it in a forward-looking way. But really, that's not the goal. The goal is to ship impact quickly and solve the needs for customers as quickly as you can. And the ecosystem is also evolving quickly, and customer needs in it are evolving. So even if you did think about technical maturity in a forward-looking way, you'd probably be wrong. So you generally, at that stage, are not doing that much. Culture, though, I think is very important and intentional. I wouldn't say Plaid sat down ahead of time and thought about this is the culture we want, but the first 5 or 10 people in a company are really going to be the ones that set the culture with their actions. And I know the founders, Zach and William, really thought carefully about that. So hiring the right people really trumped the speed of hiring at that stage. And impact was super, super important. People that were really going to prioritize business impact and customer impact over anything. And also really wanted people that were comfortable operating with just high levels of ambiguity, right? Every day was sort of different. Every month was sort of different. So those are some of the big things that really stand out in phase one. Phase two is really like, Plaid had achieved product market fit. And this is where organizational maturity starts to become more of a need. So at this stage is about 150 engineers when I think we really reached product market fit, or 150 total. So it's no longer really possible for anyone to have like complete context on what's going on. Customer demand is really growing, so it doesn't really scale to have everybody thinking about everything. You need to start coming up with interfaces within your company to scalably meet the demands of customers. And so this is where we started introducing product-oriented teams. So teams that had longer running missions based on the needs for their products. And these teams then set interfaces with the rest of the org in terms of what they owned, how to, have information flowing in and out, like what their KPIs were. And so that sort of helped solve the, Dunbar's number problem and scope down the number of sort of team interfaces you had to think about. And then, you also, at this point, you're starting to grow out functions. So it's not just an engineering led org. There's product that's growing out, design is growing out, sales is growing out. And this is like meeting the needs of customers, right? So you start to have functions that are good at doing some of these things versus everybody just trying to cover their bases.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that really quickly?
Yeah.
The question is about like sequencing for building out the early stages of some of those functions. So was it like a certain customer needed increased reliability, and so then you had to build out a team that was more geared towards infrastructure and stability? Or like how did you assess some of the sequencing for some of the early stages of those functions?
Yeah, I think it was very much based on how you wanted to scale the people that were doing those roles. And so early days, the founders were in all the sales conversations, they were in all the conversations with banks. At a certain point, you want to find expertise in doing those things. And so I think, especially on the bank side, I think we were dealing with sort of a new way of permissioning consumer data. And I think it was really important to have folks that had worked with banks before and could sort of speak bank talk, but also understand what we were trying to do and what consumers wanted to do with their data. So that was one thing, is just like having really industry specific expertise that could accelerate us. And then on the other functions, I think it was kind of similar. It was like we could get pretty far on the engineering side thinking about product just through inherent empathy, but you start to see, especially in a B2B product, like many different needs across different verticals. And so as a product function, you want somebody to come in and think about customer segmentation and platform maturity and publishing platform roadmaps and stuff like that. And that's generally not all the things that engineers like to do, right? So again, it was like, how do we scale our capabilities? And I would say that's true on the Eng side too. As we were adding engineers, for early part, you can say, let's hire a generalist because we don't exactly know where our hotspots are going to be. But at that stage, we were also saying like, okay, we want to build a mobile SDK. We need to find experts there. So that's about the stage when we started thinking about like domain and functional expertise.
I have a question about the first phase. In that phase, the team is small, and you mentioned getting context of everything is a lot more easier. So a question around that is that at that time, do you have a product dedicated roles or project management dedicated roles to help facilitating the communication and collaboration?
In the early stage, we really didn't. We relied a lot on engineering managers. So we had very lightweight tooling, right? We used Google Sheets very heavily, and our roadmap was essentially one big sheet of all the project ideas. And we would ask folks to do check-ins on that sheet, but a lot of the process was driven by engineering managers. And so the way we kind of thought about it was like engineering, as we were building out functions, engineering is always going to be the biggest function and sometimes hits the bleeding edge of needs on tools or on, HR or recruiting. And so generally as an eng management team, we'd get together and say like, what are the biggest burning problems, not just on engineering, but across the company? And are there one or two things we can take on as a team every quarter just to make that better? So it was very incremental. We knew we weren't the right people to do this forever, but it was, I think for EMs generally enjoy a little bit of process and a little bit of optimizing process. So we were able to find folks that could kind of do that as a stand-in basis for a couple of years, actually.
So the EM is actually a combination of roles, the actual engineering manager, but also a product and project manager as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of hats at that stage.
I also love the visualization of like a giant master sheet of all of the priorities of the projects. It reminds me, our COO Kyle, he's taught me everything I know about project management. And one of the quotes he introduced me to was, the best tool is like the best project management tool is the one you use. So in that case, like Google Sheets, if it's working and if it's the tool, that's great.
Right. We tried several other things. We always came back to Sheets. So kudos to Sheets.